Hello! Today we're going to be staying true to the scary season and be discussing if Dead by Daylight can be considered true horror. To do this, we're going to discuss why audiences are drawn to horror and the potential effect it has on them. We'll also consider why horror is such a popular form of entertainment and break down the definition itself. Finally, we'll discuss whether or not Dead by Daylight fits within these definitions and if it really is true horror, and just how scary is it to play. I myself am an avid horror fan, having made my own horror game in the past called Nightblights, and having studied the genre in some detail during my studies and time teaching, so prepare for a lot of references in this one. If you do enjoy this kind of content, feel free to hit the subscribe button to never miss out on a new video. But anyway, let's do this! The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Horror writings derive from the Gothic literature of the 18th century, which evolved and adapted to form the genre. But tales of monsters and ghosts have existed throughout time. For example, recently a Babylonian tablet dated back to 3400 BC has been reported to be the first recorded tale of ghosts. To cope with the unknown, people often create stories to explain away the mysteries, and these stories often lead us to horror. These stories, however, are not only a means for explanation. Over time, horror has evolved to be a strong form of entertainment. Consistently one of the most profitable movie genres, it has also cemented its place in the video game world as well. The video games industry has become more profitable than music and movies combined. The gaming industry now dominates the entertainment sector, and horror has its own substantial slice of that pie, with hugely successful titles such as Bloodborne, Amnesia, and the Resident Evil franchise. A paper on the topic of why horror is so seductive to an audience suggests, we are attracted to horrifying entertainment because we have an adaptive tendency to find pleasure in make-believe that allows us to experience negative emotions at high levels of intensity within a safe context, thus suggesting it is natural for us to seek out strong stimuli and find joy within them so long as we feel ultimately safe doing so. This is also known as sensation seeking. Zillmann in 1994 defines this as seeking of varied, novel, complex, and intense sensations and experiences, and the willingness to take physical, social, legal, and financial risks for the sake of such experiences. Essentially, it is looking to elicit strong emotions out of oneself, and horror is just one avenue to achieve this. Whoa! Damn it! I broke this vial! I hope it wasn't important. Anyway, where was I? Oh, of course. Why does some of us particularly enjoy horror over other genres? Horror stories are about engagement, about actual experience, instead of simulated, false experience. It's about discovering one's ability to feel in certain ways, and deepening and widening one's emotional experience by that means. Unease is never not worth experiencing. Unease is a genuinely perceptive, accurate response to the underlying structures of the universe. Horror allows us to feel and understand something about ourselves, something that doesn't naturally occur from a safe feeling environment. Often feeling afraid is associated with a sense of being in danger, but we can use horror films, games, and other media to widen our own understanding of ourselves from a somewhat comfortable position. It is also an engaging and immersive emotion which can utilise the concept of suspense. This can be defined as acute, fearful apprehension about deplorable events that threaten liked protagonists. We can begin to care about those characters on screen or feel so connected to them in gameplay that we experience their potential terror and dread. A powerful tool allowing us to participate with our emotions. And with this there is also the concept of resolution, which is an experience of uncertainty whose hedonic properties can vary from noxious to pleasant. This is the feeling of relief we feel as a character is saved or safe for a moment, which again can very much apply to us and our feelings within a virtual space. These feelings of impending doom or a sigh of relief make us feel something. And as stated prior, these feelings are not always easily accessed, but with horror we can, and from a comfortable, safe position, a position of control. In an interview for The New Yorker, Dr. Stephen Moran's on the topic of mourning through horror suggested that we perhaps choose to engage in horror because of our sense of control with it. You can turn away, you can turn down the volume, you can experience the level of arousal, the somatic sense of fear, and know in the back of your mind that it's not forever. We are sometimes drawn compulsively to the very things that scare us as a method of mastering them. They are suggesting that so long as we feel in control, we can enjoy the emotions relating to horror. We can always turn the video game or film off. Further studies even suggest psychological benefits to watching horror media as well. In 2007, a study into mood management actually found those with feelings of nervousness were more likely to rent horror movies. This study implies that people prefer entertainment that somewhat matches their moods. Another study looking at the relationship between anxiety and horror even suggested horror content is ideally suited for practice material for clients who would benefit from developing a more adaptive relationship with the experience of anxiety and learning how to challenge maladaptive thoughts. Basically, the idea that people can better understand and control their anxiety if they directly engage in horror fiction that may relate to what makes them nervous. This may support why those who feel nervous prefer horror. Perhaps we use this form of entertainment to alleviate and manage stress. We mentioned earlier how the unknown often leads to horror-driven stories, and many of these surround the topic of death. Another study looking at the relationship between horror and grief states, horror offers ways in which the experience of grief can be contained and regulated, and in doing so, may offer psychological benefits for the bereaved. Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I'm coming down with a fever or something. Anyway, what I am suggesting here is that we may not always engage with the horror genre simply for sensation seeking, or a sense of control, but also to cope with negative emotions relating to anxiety and the feelings associated with death. But what all of these things suggest is that horror is a tool to regulate and understand ourselves better, through emotions or confronting our own feelings. But horror is not one simple genre. Horror films, books and video games all take various forms. So let's discuss the genre itself in some more detail. Horror is a varied genre that is hard to be defined by one single definition, and therefore the most accurate is the one that defines horror through each of its categories and its subgenres. One of the stronger breakdowns of the genre comes from Todorov in 1973, who doesn't directly define horror, but their breakdown is often referred to. It breaks down elements of horror into several categories. These are uncanny, marvelous, and fantastic. So let's go through them. Uncanny, meaning laws of reality remain intact and permit an explanation of the phenomena described. The idea here is that elements of the supernatural can be present, but ultimately follow rational laws regardless of being incredible, unexpected, or unusual. An example of this could be Alien. It's disturbing and shocking, but follows understandable real-world laws. If you think about the way the xenomorphs breed and adapt, their acidic blood being evolutionary feels based in plausible reality. Marvelous. Seemingly irrational and incomprehensible phenomena that can be explained only by accepting the second layer of reality. The Lord of the Rings comes under this category, as we learn to accept the world's rules, but in terms of horror, this includes vampires, zombies, and werewolves. Films like Van Helsing and Underworld have a second layer of reality that we have to learn to accept. The final category is the fantastic. This is the hesitation experienced by a person who knows only the laws of nature, confronting an apparently supernatural event. It gives clear explanation of the irrational. The audience must then decide whether it be paranormal or a hallucination. A great example of this is The Shining. There is also some crossover between these categories when you try to put some horror media into a single one. On top of this, another paper dedicated to the genre of horror describes a list of subgenres. These provide an even greater detailed breakdown of the variety of horror out there. Some films and games will cross over into more than one as well. Rural. It is the horror that is situated in places far from civilization, which also includes a local legend, myth, or superstition. Films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Evil Dead, or The Hills Have Eyes. Cosmic implies elements of science fiction and depicts emotions when a person finds out something he would rather not know about. Hellraiser or many Lovecraftian works fit into this subgenre. Apocalyptic deals with the end of the world caused by various factors. The Day After Tomorrow, for example. Crime. It is based on a criminal plot and escalating tension with an addition of horror elements. Films like Seven or games like LA Noire. Erotic combines the sensual or sexual imagery of horror overtones or elements of the plot. Again, Hellraiser can fit into this quite nicely. Occult focuses on exorcism, the arrival of the Antichrist, cults, mysticism, curses, and a wide scale of so-called occult sciences. The 1974 Exorcist film, for example, or even games like Mortuary Assistant. Psychological, based on the fear of the main protagonist, on his feelings of guilt, on his faith and unstable emotional state of mind. The Sixth Sense, Blair Witch, or American Psycho. Surreal, not only to tell a terrifying story, but to disturb the recipient as well. These can be quite nightmarish, disjointed, or dreamlike, such as Mandy or In the Mouth of Madness. And visceral. It is full of blood, gore, and brutality. It depicts the most disgusting and most perverse forms of murder, butchering, and mutilation of the human body. Again, the Texas Chainsaw fits well here, but also films like Hostel. So horror is a vast genre and includes many elements. We haven't even discussed the other traditional subgenres such as thriller and slasher films. Which brings us to Dead by Daylight, a game which brings together iconic horror characters and some of its own creations too, which fit various categories and subgenres, many of which we've mentioned here. If I was going to place Dead by Daylight into one of these categories, it would probably be firmly in the marvellous. The entity pulling these poor souls into its realm and feeding off their continual suffering at the hands of killers and creatures relies on us to accept a second layer of reality. Subgenre wise, it pops into many with rural vibes with Cold Wind Farm, surreal with Garden of Joy, and obviously its cast come from various subgenres themselves like Pinhead and Bubba. This brings me to the concept of real horror. This is the idea that something that doesn't scare someone or tick a specific box for them, then it doesn't constitute as real horror. If a game can facilitate 4 survivor players teabagging at a monstrous killer who has failed to catch them, mocking them before they skip through the exit door clicking their flashlights, is that really horror? As stated in the last section, DBD could be described within the marvellous category. It is an asymmetrical horror game which, as we have discussed in the past, has brought the horror community together. It has done this by drawing together many of the most iconic horror figures along with their own original terrifying creations into one place. 4 survivors seek to evade the killer, repairing generators to power the exit doors and escape the trial. Killers seek to locate the survivors and slay them before they can make it out alive. All in the name of the Entity, an omnipotent being which feeds off the survivors' emotions of fear and despair. The gameplay loop alone, of killers stalking and murdering people, is reminiscent of the slasher movie subgenre. This along with its darker aesthetic themes certainly make the game look and feel like a horror game. In a paper breaking down the specifics of horror movie aesthetics, the author details various techniques used within horror media to elicit desired emotional responses. They use examples such as Saw, using combinations of colour and light to influence audiences' mood. You can suggest DBD does similar things, especially with lighting in realms like Garden of Joy, or colour palettes as seen on specific realms like Autohaven. Sound is another important factor in the design of anything entering the horror genre. You need only look at the excellent sound design accompanying any scene in The Shining to really appreciate how sound can really improve a scene or moment. Utilising higher pitched chords to increase tension, a study in 2012 even suggested that these types of non-linear chaotic noise can be evocative of negative valence, or simply put, encourage us to feel fear or anxiety. Dead by Daylight has a variety of different audio styles throughout the game, but the sounds of killers coming out of stealth and striking you, or the scores as you are chased by Hillbilly or the Dredge can really add to the feeling of tension and pressure. The game's audio adds to the atmosphere with the heartbeats, everything attempting to encourage a feeling of unease. This is all very much dependent on playing Survivor admittedly. The game is less scary as killer because you are the hunter, but we've all been jumped by a well placed pallet stun or just a survivor being in the wrong place at the right time. The game also features gruesome iconography throughout with skulls, death and hooks and much more. This is before we enter the grotesque, with killers such as the Plague or the Clown, who can be outright disgusting as they vomit on their environment and survivors, or cut pinky fingers off to suck. This is in the category of visceral horror, and this is before we describe some of the mores, which are downright disturbing with Pinhead pulling at survivor's skin, or Bubba chainsawing a survivor lifeless. The game features plenty of blood and gore throughout. Why does that all sound so tasty? I'm feeling pretty rough, a little itchy as well. But I'll be okay, let's keep going. So visually and audibly, the game ticks the horror boxes, but what about the gameplay itself? Is the game even scary to play? Now there are plenty of people out there that don't find Dead by Daylight scary, or at least don't find it scary anymore. Any media you consume, be it horror or anything else, will over time elicit less of a reaction out of you. I believe this is at the root of people suggesting the game isn't true horror. People rack up insane numbers of hours in Dead by Daylight, I myself having over 2.6k hours, but I know people with over 10,000 hours. There is also a disparity between survivor and killer gameplay. Playing killer isn't quite able to elicit the same feelings of helplessness that survivor can evoke, and if you play predominantly killer, you're going to experience less terror when playing. And when you do play Survivor, you really have to immerse yourself and care about trying to survive for the game to encourage those feelings of terror out of you. Then there is the gameplay itself. Certain killers will elicit more horror and feelings of anxiety from a player than others. When I don't hear a terror radius for the first 30 seconds of a match, I immediately become paranoid that Michael Myers or Ghostface are watching and stalking me. That feeling is awesome, but at other times when you see a plague's fountain, that initial terror immediately dissipates. I would suggest much of the actual scares from DBD come as a result of stealth killers' abilities, or perks and add-ons that give killers undetectable status dropping their terror radius for a time, like Tinkerers or Trail of Torment. So is Dead by Daylight scary to play? It depends. Are you playing Survivor? Who is the killer? And what are their perks and add-ons? Not every combination is going to be scary, but it can be. Dredge jumping from a locker suddenly, a ghost face from out of nowhere, Pyramid Head's M2 whilst using Tinkerers, or a surprise nemesis using Serotonin Injector can all give you a nasty shock. The game definitely ticks the horror genre boxes as discussed in Chapter 4.0, so to me, and mostly all academic definitions, Dead by Daylight is definitely a true horror game. But technically, so is Casper the Friendly Ghost. What do you think though? Is Dead by Daylight a true horror experience? Does it still scare you? I'd love to know. Thank you for watching, and do consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the video. Oh, and to whoever finds this tape, please make sure it makes its way into the video. I'm starting to think dropping that vial was bad. Happy Halloween!